Okay, so we will have no quiz today. And yeah, regarding our midterm exam, yeah, we will have it next Wednesday. And we will have no class on next Monday, okay, because it's just a midterm exam week. So yeah, we will skip our class next Monday and yeah, have our exam on Wednesday next week. Yeah, and then after that, in about 1.5 weeks, or yeah, at the latest, in about 2 weeks after the exam week, yeah, you guys have to submit the project proposal. So yeah, it will be roughly about in 2 weeks after the final exam. So it will be sometime around so it will be by November 7th. Okay, and also it will be just a just 1 or 2 page long kind of report to describe your project ideas, and yeah, you guys have to write it in a LaTeX. So LaTeX is another kind of editor, I mean word editing kind of software. Okay, so has anyone used LaTeX before? LaTeX. Okay, so you guys will have to prepare for your project proposal document, which is about a page or two long, and in LaTeX format. Okay, and actually there is a kind of Google Doc version of this LaTeX editor, which is called this Overleaf. So in many cases in these days, people are writing the research papers by using this LaTeX, and also especially in this Overleaf platform, because it's just works like a Google Docs, where many people can collaborate or simultaneously edit the software. I mean, edit the document. So these are some of the papers that I've been recently worked on. Let's see. So this is basically using the LaTeX in the back end, but just the editing tool is just provided by this website. Okay, so on the left, you will see this document source. Okay, so you can actually specify your document title like this by just specifying the field called the title, and then start with an abstract, and then put the abstract contents over here. Okay, then our document will begin after this keyword called make title, and it specifies the section title as this command called section, and then after you write the document, and then it will be just nicely compiled into some PDF form that is shown on the right. So these nice looking papers are actually the result of editing this LaTeX document on the left that we saw. Okay, so you can optionally put your figures by just separately creating your figures from PowerPoint or Illustrator or any other softwares, and then create it as a PNG or PDF files, and then add it to this document. Okay. Okay, so Yep. So I'll ask you to write your proposal document and also final report at the end in this LaTeX form. And preferably, I encourage you to, or I recommend you to write this LaTeX document in this overleaf. Okay. And then I will provide the template so that you can just start with. Okay. So, any questions about the exam or project proposal? Okay, and let's discuss today's material then. So we discussed about some normalization scheme called Javier initialization and also Hay initialization, right? Oops. Okay, so we basically randomize or initialize all the weights sampled from zero mean and the unit variance normal distribution, right? And then we divide each element by the number of input node that we have, right? And so there's, the square root of input node. So that was the Javier initialization, and because of the effect of the ReLU that kills all the negative activations into zero, and thus we can roughly think that variance was reduced to half, right? And so, we actually increased such parameters by the square root of 2, so that we can compensate that reduced variance due to the ReLU kind of activation. Okay, so that was the main point of this Hay initialization. And so I briefly described about how this batch norm works, right? So if we have a internal node that we have in our neural network, and then given our batch size of maybe 5, and then given the 5 different three-dimensional vector representation of our input data, and then we will have a 5 different values captured in this node, and then we compute the mean and the variance, and then normalize each of these values by using this mean and the variance value. And that will result in having the data having a zero mean and unit variance, right? And then the batch normalization has the second important step of scaling and the shifting by the amount of gamma and beta, right? And those two parameters are trained by our network. So these are trainable parameters that are optimized through our gradient descent algorithm, right? So we actually compute the gradient with respect to this gamma and beta, and then we gradually update them. And there was a question about whether we use the common parameters or not for these gamma and beta, and those two parameters are common across all the batch, all the mini batches that we have. So if we have 100 data items, and then suppose we have mini batch size of 20, and then for one epoch we have a 5 iterations or 5 different mini batches. And also I explained about the meaning of an epoch, right? Okay, so we have 100 data items in total in our training data and 20 data items per mini batch, and then we have to iterate like 5 times so that we can touch upon all the data items just once, right? Because we have in total 100 data items. Okay, and thus for each of mini batches of our 20 training data items for each mini batch, and then it will produce different mean and the variance value, So those two values will become different for different mini batches in the batch normalization. So in other words, in the first step, our mean and the variance value will change, right? In the second step of this gamma and beta will be used as the same parameters, right? Because they will be just the common parameters that are applied to all of our training data items, right? So these are just the common parameters, but they will be gradually updated, right, due to the gradient descent step. And one student asked a question about how this or why this batch normalization has the regularization effect in our training process. So I'm not sure if I explained it already, but so at each mini batch, so we have 5 different groups of these mini batches, right? And then each mini batch will have a different mu and the sigma value. So this is called the mu and this is a sigma. And then those two values will become different per mini batch. And so the first step normalizes our data using different values. But alternatively, we can actually compute this mean and the variance by using all the data items that we have in our training data, right? And so alternative approach in our batch norm is to use just a single mean and the variance value computed from the entire training data in the first step of a mini batch. I mean, the first step of a batch normalization, right? But in that case, even though those mean and the variance value will be more reliable statistical measure, because it is using all the data items that we have. So it is computed from 100 data items compared to just 20 data items. So those values of estimate as an estimator of our mean and the variance value, I mean, that will be more reliable in case we use entire data items, right? But we actually intentionally use a little bit inaccurate measure of the mean and the variance per each mini batch by using only 20 data items instead of 100 data items, although they can be viewed as an inaccurate measure of our estimate of a mean and the variance. But we actually don't know. I mean, from the perspective of a regularization, I mean, the main idea of the regularization is that we do not fully trust our training data, right? So what if our training data is still just a limited set that will give us the inaccurate estimate of the mean and the variance, right? So in that case, relying on the mean and the variance by using the entire training data items may not be also a good idea. So and thus, even though they may not be accurate ones, we actually allow the networks to use different mu and sigma values per each gradient descent iteration or per each gradient descent update. Okay, so by using different normalization parameters of mu and the sigma used over here, our network can be trained when those values may have some fluctuation. Okay, because anyways the estimate from entire data may not be an accurate one. Okay. So that's kind of a regularization effect that we have. And then how about computing this mean and the variance in the case of a testing phase? So we definitely have this mini batch out of the entire training data during our training time, but what particular values do we use for this mu and the sigma over here in the training time? So in the case of training time, those will be estimated. I mean, so in the testing time, we don't actually have a the sense of a mini batch, right? So yeah, suppose we bought the IBM Watson cancer detection algorithm, and then yeah, we are running a hospital, and then suppose one patient came in, and then we have to perform our prediction, right? And then how can we compute this mu and the sigma given there is no notion of a mini batch in our test data, right? So in the case of test data, we have to perform our prediction for individual cases, right? And so there is no notion of a mini batch because we cannot just wait for maybe 20 people to come in to our hospital, right? And so we basically update or estimate those two parameters by using something called the running average. Okay, running average. So this kind of notion of the running average was also used in the momentum or ADA-GRED or RMS prop or ADAM methods. And so the running average is working like this. So given the first data item and the second data item and so on, suppose these are the training data that are coming in at the first place and the second and so on. And then up to maybe x3, and then we will do the estimation by using the previous data, and then suppose our estimate of the mean value of an x at the time step t minus 1. So suppose this guy is an old one, and then now we want to compute the we want to update this average by incorporating the current sample. Okay, in that case we can just simply so let's just denote it as 2 because it's just a previous time step. And so this guy is updated as the weighted average between these two values. Okay, so for example, we can just assign the weight as 0.7 and 0.3. So in this case, we are doing the weighted average between the current sample point and the previous mean value. Okay. So this value will be our hyperparameters, right? But this is called the running average. Okay. And we can also compute this variance term in a similar manner, right? And so in this case, we are using this average value by just assigning the weight onto this guy as a 0.7 and the mean up to the previous time step as 0.3 as our weight. But in terms of an individual weight values, for these previous samples, we can actually compute the weight assigned to each of these samples in the as follows. So in this case of computing the mean value at the previous time step, this guy will have had the weight values assigned as 0.7, right? So this guy will have the weight of 0.7, and then that will be added to mu x at the previous time step, right? And when computing the next time step, and then this guy will be further multiplied by 0.3, right? And so for this particular sample, which is just immediate previous sample, will have the weight of 0.3 times 0.7, right? And then what about this guy? What about this guy? Or let's just focus on this x2, and then how its weight is changed when computing the average at the x4 or the time step at 4. Okay, and in this case, when computing this guy's weight will be 0.3 times 0.7, right? And then what about the mean at the time step 4. And then this guy will have the further weight by getting multiplied by 0.3, right? And so we will be just multiplying 0.3 once again on this value, right? So these are the individual weight that is assigned to a particular previous sample that we have in the, okay. Okay, and then x1, x2, x3, and so on. Given xn, what will be the weight at the xn minus 1? It will be 0.7 times 0.3, right? And then what about xn minus 2? 0.3 times 0.7 times 0.3 to the power of squared, right? And then 0.7 times 0.3 to the power of 3, and so on, right? Okay, so these are the weights assigned to each of our previous samples, right? And then let's verify. Let's verify that is actually having the sum of these weights as 1. So if it is just an average, okay, so this guy will have the weight assigned as 0.7, right? So these are the individual weights assigned to each sample. And then in this case, are those some of these weights becoming 1 or not? I mean, if it is an average value of the previous samples, and then their sum of weights should be 1 anyways, right? So that way we can still say that it's a weighted average of all the previous samples, right? And so let's just compute the sum of weights, okay? So 0.7 and 0.7 times 0.3, right? And then 0.7, 0.3 squared, and so on. So in general, we can just write it as 0.7 times 1 and so we can represent our rate in this form, right? And then what is the sum of this infinite series of numbers? So it will be 1 minus 0.3, right? And so that way, we can maintain this weight values as 1, okay? Okay, so when given this infinite number of series of numbers, and then we verify that the sum of these weight is 1, right? But what if our our series has the finite length, okay? Okay, and then maybe incorporating just an n number of samples, and then how can we compute their sum of weights? So we still have a 0.7 and something like this. Is it correct or not? I actually forgot the exact formula for this sum of these series of numbers. What is the formula for this? What's the numerator? 뭐죠 이거? 이거 아는 사람 없어요? 네? 1-R이에요. 분모가 1-Rn? 1-R. 아, 1-R이요? 아, 네. 그 다음에 분자가 뭐죠?
A 척탄 곱하기 1-4를
이거요? Okay, then if we incorporated this n number of samples, what would be the sum of this weight values? .7 and 1 minus Is it correct? If I'm not, yeah, please correct me. So, yeah, we consider this series of numbers up to n different samples. Okay, and so we can cancel them out. Okay, so the weight values, the sum of weight values will be 1 minus 0.3 to the power of n plus 1. Okay, so if we use this finite number of samples, and then we can see that the sum of these weight values are not exactly 1, right? And so it cannot be viewed as this average value, weighted average of our previous samples, right? So this step should be also incorporated, or this sum of these weights should also be incorporated in order to remove or eliminate some potential bias due to the fact that we have not exactly sum to 1 weight values in this running average algorithm or strategy. And so this is the sum of the weight. And so once we compute this running average in this manner, so for example, up to this point, suppose we computed this running average, and then given n being 3, we have to divide this number by this number. Okay, because these are the total sum of those weight values that we assigned to each of these x1, 2, 3. Okay, so we consider this running average at the time step 3. Okay, so once we update our running average in this manner, and then this running average should be divided by this number. So because the sum of these weights is equal to this number. So does it make sense? So this is how we compute this running average. Okay, and of course, if n gets infinity, and then this value will become close to 1, right? And thus this normalization or additional value that we use to divide the running mean will become close to 1. Okay. Any questions about it? And although, it is a little bit back and forth, but this bias correction, I mean, it can be called as a bias correction, okay? Because this running average scheme is not actually giving us the total weight sum as 1, right? So, in order to fix or correct this bias, we actually have an additional code in some other algorithms that we studied. So where did you see this kind of bias correction stuff? So this guy, bias correction, that was used in the Adam algorithm. Okay, so it is also using this running average scheme for this first momentum and the second momentum. So this is the gradient at the first time step, and then if beta 1 is 0.3, and then we are assigning 0.7 to the current sample, and 0.3 at the previous time step's mean value, right? So this is exactly following, this is following the exact same kind of strategy of this running average of the first gradient values. And then in terms of this second momentum, or the squared value of our gradient, we also do the same thing, right? Given this beta 2 as also like another constant as 0.4, and then we are doing the weighted average between these two by assigning these two different weights recursively, right? Okay, and then we actually divide it by 1 minus beta 1 to the power of t, and 1 minus beta 2 to the power of t, right? So it is almost like dividing the running average by this r to the 1 minus r to the power of t, right? And then why is it not t plus 1, but actually t? It is just simple because t is starting with what? So given this Python statement, t is starting with what? 0, right? Instead of 1, right? So at t being 1, it is actually considering the two data instances, right? So so our series of values has a starting index as 0, and that's why we are using 1 minus RT instead of t plus 1. Oh, probably not, right? Sorry, but t starts from 1, right? Yeah, sorry. But why do we have 1 minus RT instead of RT plus 1, R to the power of T plus 1? Why is it so? 왜 그러죠?
애초에 처음에
네.
아까 전 PPT에서
네.
RTS이 아니라 원래 RT 아니에요?
아, 그래요? 가만히 있어보자.
저 그냥 N.
아, 네. 그러네요. 네. So, So sorry for the confusion, but this one is our x1, right? And its weight is 0.7, right? And thus, if we consider n samples, and then the last entry will be 0.3 to the power of n minus 1, right? Yeah, sorry about the confusion. And in this case, so we have to have this 1 minus 0.3 to the power of n, right? And so it is consistent with this result, okay? Okay, so we now understood why we need this bias correction term. Okay, so this is because of the sum of the weights that are actually assigned to this finite length of the series of our our variables of this first moment and the second moment. Any questions so far? Okay. 네.
그 러닝이 구할 때
네.
왜 웨이트를 n분의 1로 안 주고 이렇게 늦게 나올수록 웨이트를 더 많이 주는 거지?
네. 이게 뭐 늦게 나올수록 더 웨이트를 많이 주지는 않을 수 있고요. 그러니까 여기서 why do we assign more weights to the current sample? In this particular example, where we assigned 0.7, which is definitely larger than 0.3. So in practice, in Atom, as we can see, when using this Atom, actually, we usually set this beta 1 and beta 2 as really large value, which means, we actually assign higher weight on this value, such as like 0.99, and accordingly, the value or weight assigned to this current sample will be only 0.01, right? So in that case, we are assigning really small weights to the current sample, right? So the intuition or justification for that is this previous average value is something that we have to rely more on, right? Because the previous mean value is incorporating all the previous samples that we observed, and then the current one is only one sample that we just saw at the current time step, right? So this is the intuition. But it actually, we can also think in the other way. So in this case of a first momentum computation, so it is actually the effect of this momentum idea of the momentum method. But momentum is to compensate some compensate the situation where our current gradient value is not kind of reliable, right? But in practice, if we think of the original stochastic gradient descent, and then what would be the corresponding or equivalent kind of weight values that is assigned to each of these two parts. So if beta 1 is set as just 0, and that means we just use only the current samples as our first momentum, and then it is not incorporating the previous velocity or previous samples at all, right? So in that case, it is just the same as stochastic gradient descent that only uses the current time steps gradient vector, right? And so from my from my kind of intuition, and then we might as well give a high weight onto this part, right? Because that will be more closer to just the original stochastic gradient descent, while giving kind of a slightly small weight on this previous momentum, right? Because if beta 1 is really large, and then it can no longer be called a stochastic gradient descent, right? So we are, when updating our gradient, and then we are relying on all the previous gradient that we saw in the previous time steps, rather than the current gradient values that we just observed, right? But in the case of gradient descent, we are only using the current time steps gradient, right? So we can also use this high weights assigned to the current time steps. So either scenarios will both be valid, but in practice, when using this atom, we rely more on the previous samples. But one thing to note here is that even if we assigned the weight as a 0.01, and then roughly at the time step at t of 100, and then if we consider the equal weights on each of our samples, and then this 0.01 will be kind of the right weight value that we assigned to the current samples, right? So it can be viewed as a larger weight, relatively large weights when t is greater than 100, because we incorporate much larger number than 100 samples, but still we assign 0.01 to the current time step, right? And if t is smaller than 100, and then this weight can be viewed as really relatively smaller weight than the weights assigned to the other samples, right? But those will work as like initial values that will be assigned to the current time step, but still, in terms of the pattern of weight assignments, as the time gets, as the time index goes and larger, the weight values assigned to this guy will become smaller and smaller. So if it is initially assigned as a point, for example, 0.7, which is a relatively high weight, right? But still, in the next time step, it will get assigned as 0.3. And then in the next time step, it will be assigned as a smaller weight, right? So the weight values will be smaller and smaller, assigned to this particular sample values, right? And so, so that way, we can still call it as a running mean, which means we incorporate less and less the older samples. Okay, but but if it is a 0.01, and then we can think of this series of numbers, right? And thus the decreasing factor will be close to 1, and thus this decreasing pattern will not be drastic. So it will be smoothly decreasing, although it was assigned as a small values at an initial stage. Any questions? 네.
엣지 정도와 드롭아웃 프로파일에서 한글로
네. 하여튼 뭐 그 배치놈은 그때 이제 얘기했던 것처럼 가장 중요한 그 효과는 하여튼 우리의 이 non-linear 유닛, 이게 이제 렐루든 시그모이드든 탄H든 항상 이제 0 근처로 이렇게 우리가 입력을 줘야만 이게 non-linear 유닛이 뭔가 잘 역할을 한다 이거예요. 뭐 이런데 이제 걸려 있으면 다 이제 1 값을 내줄 거고, 이제 그레디언트는 다 0이 되어서 학습이 안 될 거고요. 네, 그래서 하여튼 우리가 뭔가 여기 주변, 그리고 이게 평균을 0으로 맞췄다고 해도 이게 그때 얘기했던 것처럼 이게 베리언스가 너무 크면 평균이 0이라 그래도 아무 소용이 없어요. 실제로 나타나는 값은 뭐 1000, 마이너스 1000 이렇게 될 수 있으니까. 그래서 이제 역시 그레디언트가 죽는 건 또 매한가지고. 근데 또 너무 작으면 이제 모두 다 0만 내주면 뭐 예를 들면 0.0001, 마이너스 0.00005 뭐 이런 값 내줘봐야 뒤쪽에서 실제로 이제 보이는 값들은 이 모든 값들이 그냥 0에 가까운 값들로 보이니까, 이것도 뭐 백프랍을 할 때 이 그레디언트가 이렇게 뭐 잘 흐른다는 거에서는 좋지만, 어찌됐건 뭔가 인풋이 달라지면 이 해당 노드에서 주는 액티베이션 값이 이래저래 달라지면은 그거에 따라서 하여튼 뭐 서로 다른 정보를 뒤쪽에 전달해 줘야 되는데 그러지 못하니까, 하여튼 너무 작아도 너무 커도 안 되니까, 아까 얘기했던 것처럼 뭔가 0 근처이 돼, 또 분산이 이제 항상 1 정도가 되도록 뭔가 딱 픽스를 시켜주는 게 좀 중요한 그거고요. 그 다음에 이제 근데 이제 뭐 그때도 얘기했듯이 어떤 노드가 그러면은 대략적으로 반은 항상 죽어야 되고 반은 항상 살아야 되느냐, 그러니까 그 비율, 반이라는 비율이 도대체 어디서 온 거냐. 우리는 뭔가 하여튼 액티베이션을 적절히 줌으로써 그레디언트도 잘 뒤쪽에서 흐르고, 뭐 non-linear 유닛도 제대로 된 어떤 역할을 좀 할 수 있게끔 그 레인지만 맞춰준 거지, 실제로 그 노드가 뭐 그때도 얘기했던 것처럼 실제로 잘 액티베이션 되지 말아야 되는 노드, 뭐 예를 들면 그게 어떤 뭐 무슨 치타의 꼬리일 때 발생되는 액티베이션 되는 딱 그 노드다라고, 뭐 치타가 뭐 실제로 뭐 일상생활에서 우리가 치타를 얼마나 보겠어요. 그래서 뭐 실제로 랜덤하게 우리가 잔뜩 이미지를 모았을 때 그 해당 노드가 이제 액티베이션 돼야 되는 그게 실제로는 많이 없을 수도 있는 거죠. 그래서 뭐 예를 들면 뭐 렐루 같은 경우 뭐 이렇게 된다 그러면 이제 어떻게 보면 이 레인지를 뭐 한 이 정도만 맞춰주면 이제 대략적으로 뭐 한 10%의 데이터는 살아서 넘어가고, 이제 뭔가 90%의 데이터는 다 죽고, 뭐 이런 식으로 이제 우리가 좀 조절을 해야 될 필요도 있다는 거죠. 0 근처만으로 맞추는 게 능사가 아니다. 그것만이 능사가 아니다. 그래서 이제 배치놈에서 두 번째 스텝이 필요합니다. 그 다음엔 그 노멀라이제이션이 되는 이유는 일단은 그 평균 분산으로 뭔가 나눠주는 그 스텝, 그러니까 그게 다 어디서 왔느냐 하면 하여튼 non-linear 유닛의 그 인풋으로서 적절한 레인지를 공급해주고자 하는 그 역할을 해주려고 하는 건데, 근데 그 값을 사실 우리 학습 데이터에서 그러니까 모든 데이터를 다 한번 넣어보고 그때 이제 평균 및 분산을 가지고 노멀라이즈를 할 수도 있지만, 아까 그렇게 되면은 아까 얘기했듯이 이제 그게 좀 그게 오히려 더 안 좋을 수도 있어요. 그게 이제 어떻게 안 좋냐면, 예를 들면 뭐 한국 사람한테서만 뭔가 이렇게 잔뜩 학습을 해서 그러면 이제 어떤 하나의 노드가 뭐 예를 들면 얘가 뭐 우리의 어떤 사람의 키를 가지고 이렇게 한다. 그러면 키가 뭐 170, 168, 173 뭐 이런 식의 세 가지로 나왔어요. 그러면 이거는 이제 170을 기준으로 노멀라이즈가 될 거고, 얘는 뭐 0으로, 얘는 이제 마이너스 2로, 얘는 플러스 3으로 될 거잖아요. 그럼 이거는 뭐냐면, 이제 다른 애들보다 우리가 한 플러스 3 정도로, 이게 평균이라는 어떤 그런 기준값이 있을 때, 그걸 기준으로 했을 때 이제 플러스 3 혹은 얘는 이제 마이너스 2 정도만큼 작다라는 이야기가 돼요. 근데 이제 이때 이제 평균을 뭔가 우리가 미국 사람한테 적용을 하면 뭐 미국 사람들은 뭐 183이고 뭐 이런데, 그러면은 이제 이게 그러니까 이 173을 적용하면은 170을 적용하면 이제 13이라는 뭐 이제 한국 사람을 기준으로 하면 이렇게 큰 값을 내줄 수는 있지만, 이게 우리가 뭐 미국 사람을 기준으로 한다면 미국 사람의 평균 키는 180이다. 그러면 이제 177 180 뭐 이런 식의 값들이 나왔으면, 이제 여기 값들을 기준으로 상대적으로 이 사람들이 얼마나 이제 그 크고 작은 키를 가지는지 뭐 이런 것들을 좀 네, 뭔가 그때그때에 해당하는 이제 평균값에 따라서 좀 달리 적용을 해줘야만 이때 주어지는 이 노드에 이 노멀라이제이션을 하고 났을 때 이제 이게 상대적으로 가지는 어떤 네, 평균값 대비 얼마나 이제 큰 값인지를 좀 우리가 실제로 모델한테 좀 줄 수가 있어요. 네, 그래서 네, 그래서 하여튼 뭐 여기서 이 평균, 여기서의 이제 180으로의 평균을 쓰는 게 사실 더 좋은 거냐? 뭐 사실 이거는 좀 뭐 네, 우리가 모르는 거긴 하지만 일단은 기본적으로는 이제 요 노드가 이제 상대적으로 다른 사람들에 비해서 얼마나 이제 뭐 키가 큰지 작은지를 나타내기 위해서는 이제 그때 이제 평균 값들을 좀 사용을 해줘야 된다. 약간 뭐 그런 것들이 좀 있고, 네. 그리고 이 값, 여기서 구해진 어떤 그 평균 값이 실제로 전체를 대변하는 평균이 아닐 거라면 그때 배치에 따라서 이제 그 숫자는 좀 적더라도 네, 그 적은 숫자들의 샘플에서 나타나는 그 평균으로 그때 이제 서로 다른 값들을 쓰면 그러면 이제 네. 어떤 노드는 여기 있었을 때는 마이너스 2였지만 뭐 예를 들면 168이 여기 있었다. 그러면 이 값은 이제 네. 마이너스 12의 값으로 이제 실제로 이 첫 번째 노멀라이제이션을 하고 나서는 네, 입력으로 들어가겠죠. 왜냐하면 여기서의 배치에서의 놈은 이제 그러니까 저기 평균값은 이제 180이니까요. 네, 그래서 이게 실제로 같은 피처 값인데도 불구하고 이 값을 우리는 그때 배치를 기준으로 언제는 이제 마이너스 2로 넣어줄 수도 있고 언제는 이제 마이너스 12로 넣어줄 수도 있는 거예요. 그렇게 되면 이제 똑같은 학습 데이터를 하더라도 실제로 네트워크한테 우리가 주는 그때 입력은 그때 다른 값이 될 수도 있는 거잖아요. 그러니까 이게 좀 그런 레귤러라이제이션 효과를 가진다라는 건데 그 레귤러라이제이션 효과가 이제 왜 생기느냐 이제 이 같은 트레이닝 데이터를 어떤 특정한 기준으로 평균을 빼서 이제 마이너스 2로 이제 만드는 것 자체가 그 과정 자체가 이제 네, 아까 얘기했던 것처럼 평균이 이제 뭐 170이 될지 아니면 뭐 180이 될지 그 값이 이제 우리 학습 데이터에서 나온 어떤 그 싱글 값 하나만으로 좀 뭔가 기준으로 삼으면 그거는 항상 그 동일한 기준에 의해서만 이제 적용이 돼갖고 그 동일한 어떤 평균값에 빼져서 그 나오는 값으로 뭔가 우리 네트워크가 학습이 될 텐데, 네, 그 값이 꼭 네, 평균값이 우리가 아까도 얘기했던 것처럼 꼭 믿을만한 거냐, 그게 완벽한 우리 데이터를 대변하는 평균값이냐가 또 아닐 수가 있으니까 그때 우리가 학습을 할 때 같은 어떤 피처 값이더라도 이제 그때 서로 다른 노멀라이제이션으로 작용하는 이제 평균을 빼줌으로써 그 피처의 값을 좀 다양하게 집어넣어서 우리 네트워크를 학습을 시키자. 약간 뭐 이런 네, 요소로 이제 진행이 돼요. 네, 그래서 뭐 그 다음에 이제 그 뭐 스타캐스틱 그레이디언트 디센트 자체도 역시 비슷하게 애초에 기본 아이디어는 이제 풀 배치를 썼을 때 풀 배치를 썼을 때 그레이디언트 디센트. 네. 그거에 비해서 이제 부정확한 로스를 쓰는 거긴 하지만 그래도 그게 이제 어느 정도 레귤러라이제이션 효과를 가진다라는 게 있잖아요. 네. 그래서 뭐 네, 그때 이런 이야기 했었죠. 그래서 이제 어떤 그 트레이닝 데이터에 의해서 규정되는 혹은 정해지는 어떤 특정한 로스나 아니면 트레이닝 데이터에서 정해지는 어떤 단일한 어떤 기준을 그 기준 하나만을 가지고 이제 뭔가 우리가 학습을 하면 그게 이제 오버피팅이 되기 쉬우니까 네, 그래서 이제 배치놈에서도 이제 그때 배치에 따라서 그 해당하는 평균 값은 조금씩 달라지지만 그래도 그 조금씩 달라지는 값들을 기준으로 같은 값이라 할지라도 다양하게 그런 식으로 이제 노멀라이즈를 해서 그 값을 넣어 주어야만 이게 좀 네, 실제로는 부정확한 값을 사용을 하는 걸 할지라도 그게 이제 테스트 데이터에서의 성능은 좀 더 좋을 수 있다. 약간 뭐 그렇게 돼요. 근데 이제 참고로 배치놈을 지금 이렇게 되면 이게 배치놈이 우리 트레이닝 데이터를 어찌됐건 좀 부정확하게 만드는 거잖아요. 부정확하게 만드는 거고 그런 경우에 그게 우리의 테스트 데이터에 대해서 꼭 순기능을 할 것이냐, 꼭 또 그렇진 않을 수도 있겠죠. 뭐 사실 어떻게 보면 내가 지금 이야기하고 있는 게 어떻게 보면 약간 끼워 맞추기식이잖아요. 네. 그리고 사실 테스트 데이터에서 잘 나올지 안 나올지는 사실 뭔가 이렇게 추가적인 어떤 우리가 장치를 더 했을 때 이게 사실 뭐, 네. 실제로 테스트 데이터의 성능이 더 올라가면 뭐 잘한 거고, 뭐 죽었다 깨어나도 안 올라간다 그러면 사실 뭐, 네, 그거거든요. 그리고 이제 레귤러라이제이션이라는 게 다 그래요. 뭐 L1, L2 레귤러라이제이션 그런 걸 할 때 성능이 아예 안 오를 수도 있고요. 실제로 그리고 뉴럴넷에서는 L1, L2 레귤러라이제이션을 거의 안 써요. 왜냐하면 실질적으로 경험적으로 볼 때 그게 이제 테스트 데이터에 대한 성능을 거의 올려주질 않으니까. 그래서 뭐 그거에 대해서도 사람들이 뭐 이유를 찾고 어쩌고저쩌고 한 게 있지만 어찌됐건 이제 뭐 L1, L2 레귤러라이제이션도 어느 정도 약간은 좀 끼워 맞추기식이 좀 있긴 있거든요. 왜냐면 학습 데이터에 대해서의 피팅 말고 완전 별도로 우리가 별도의 별개의 기준을 갖고 와서 이것만이 아니라 이것까지 같이 해갖고 미니마이제이션을 해봐라. 그랬더니 어찌됐건 우리는 모르는 데이터에 대해서의 성능이 요거 조금 꼈을 때 잘 나온다면 약간 이런 식의 논리니까. 네. 그래서 이 배치놈도 사실, 네. 좀 뭐 그런 게 있어요. 그러니까 실질적으로 이제 학습을 시켜보면 배치놈을 아예 안 쓰면 학습이 초반에 아예 안 되는 그런 효과, 그러니까 그런 단점을 좀 해결을 해줘요. 그러니까 배치놈을 아예 안 쓰면 이게 랜덤 이니셜라이제이션에 의해서 데드렐루도 발생을 많이 할 수가 있고, 랜덤 이니셜라이제이션 하다 보면 어떤 노드들은 그때 해당하는 레인지가, 그러니까 난리니어 유닛에 넣기 전에 그 해당 노드의 아웃풋, 그러니까 리니어 컴비네이션을 하고 나서의 그 노드의 아웃풋이 꼭 그게 어디 0 근처에 있겠어요. 그게 뭐 당연히 이제 뭐 시그모이드나 뭐 이런 거 쓰면 이제 세츄레이티드 되는 리전이나 이런 데 있을 수가 있겠죠. 그래서 그렇게 되면 하여튼 그 노드는 그 반대에서 그레디언트가 다 죽어갖고 오기 때문에, 그래서 이제 레이어가 쌓였을 때, 레이어가 이제 깊어졌을 때 이제 배치놈이 없이는 학습이 이제 아예 안 되는 경우들이 이제 비일비재하고, 네, 그래서 이제 배치놈을 쓰면 일단은 그러니까 처음 이터레이션들에서는 학습이 그래도 쭉쭉 그래도 잘 올라가요. 성능이 쭉쭉 그래도. 네. 로스가 뭐 죽었다 깨어나도 안 떨어지다가 배치놈을 쓰면 이렇게 쭉 떨어지고. 네. 그리고 이제 뭐 당연히 이제 테스트 데이터에 대해서 애큐러시는 뭐 이렇게 되겠죠? 이런 그래프 알죠? 로스 이게 트레이닝 이게 테스트. 그래서 이제 우리가 이제 밸리데이션 데이터 따로 빼놓고 이게 얼리 스타핑이라고 혹시 아나요? 얼리 스타핑. 말 그대로 일찍 스탑한다 이건데, 이제 밸리데이션 애큐러시가 같이 떨어지다가 이제 올라가기 시작하면 이게 오버피팅 되기 시작하는 거니까 여기서 이제 잘라서 이때 파라미터를 우리가 가지고 와서 이거 위에 최종 모델로 쓰는 거예요. 뭐 이렇게 하죠, 다. 네. 네, 근데 이제 어찌됐건 밸리데이션 애큐러시, 우리가 달성하게 되는 밸리데이션 애큐러시가 혹은 밸리데이션 로스 혹은 애큐러시가 요 정도쯤 된다라고 하면, 이제 배치놈을 예를 들면 아예 안 쓴다라고 하면 훨씬 더 천천히 뭔가 학습이 되겠죠. 네. 학습 자체가 훨씬 더 천천히 될 거고, 근데 이제 중요한 건 이제 학습만 일단 되게만 하면 오히려 그 배치놈을 안 썼을 때 테스트 데이터에 대한 성능도 더 이렇게 낮아질 수도 있어요. 네, 그래서 하여튼 배치놈이 좀 초반에 학습을 좀 잘 하기 위한 용도로 많이 쓰이고, 근데 이제 또 동시에 실제로 이제 배치놈을 꼭 써야만 그 테스트 데이터에 대한 성능을 올려주는 이런 레귤러라이제이션의 순기능으로서의 레귤러라이제이션 효과가 있는 것만은 아니에요. 네. 또 다른 질문, 답이 됐어요? 다른 질문 있어요? And also, you have to be able to draw. You have to be able to draw the computational graph of this batch norm, and you have to do your own job on the drawing the computation graph when having maybe 2 or 3 samples. Okay, and then you can draw the computation graph of the batch norm layer, and then also perform the backpropagation on this computational graph of this batch norm. Okay, and then you will have a better idea. And also, one thing to note is that, you guys now understand the role of batch norm to put the proper regions as an input to the nonlinear layers. So in almost all the cases, this batch norm is added in the middle of this fully connected layer and 10H. Or any other nonlinear units, okay? Okay. Okay, so adding noise in the training phase will have those effects of regularization, right? So the main idea again is that we don't entirely rely on or trust our training data, right? Okay, so any questions about this chapter 6? Okay, and then let's move to chapter 7. I think I downloaded the 2018 lecture. Oh, it is all 18 lecture. Okay. So that's why, let's see. So there was a term called condition number, right? Does anyone know about the definition of this condition number? So this condition number, I'm also confused, but this is defined given a particular matrix A, and suppose your matrix A has singular value decomposition, and then given this singular value decomposition output, we can think of their largest singular value, okay, largest singular value, and also the smallest singular value. And then, of course, the singular values are all positive, and so, so the condition number is defined as the ratio between this mean and the minimum and the maximum singular value. And roughly, you can understand this as like, so if we have maybe three-dimensional vector, and then suppose this three-dimensional vector is also transformed into three-dimensional vector by this formula. So where y and x are three-dimensional vector, and w is our linear transformation matrix, and then we can just do the singular value decomposition on this w, and then compute their ratio between the minimum and the maximum singular value, singular values. And then if you can, roughly if you have a 3x3 matrices, 3x3 matrix, and then you have 3 different singular value. Okay, and although it's not a accurate explanation, but each of these singular values will specify like how how your slope at each direction in this gradient, in this matrix, how steep the slope is, that is determined by the singular value for each of our axes. So the first axis and the second axis, and if we have another dimension for our input and output vector, and then that is also having some slope, overall slope, or how steep it is, and then that is defined or characterized by W singular value corresponding to each axis. And so these two ratio, the ratio between these two is specifying how your mountain in this loss function is actually how much skewed this loss function is. Okay, so if it is like this, and then we have two axes where the first axis has really like flat shape, and then another axis will have really steep shape, right? And so those are determined by the this singular values, and if the ratio between the two is really large, and then it means our mountain is really skewed in this manner. And then what is the case where this W matrix, the condition number is close to 1? So in that case, the minimum and the maximum value is approximately the same, right? So in this case, the mountain of our loss function will be like this kind of circular shape instead of really like flat and thin ellipse. Okay, so in general, this guy, this shape of our loss function is preferred, right? Because if we apply the gradient descent, and then it will be like oscillating in this manner, and then it will take a lot of steps until we converge to this optimal point. Okay. And you guys understand what the saddle point is? What is the saddle point? So for both of these local minima or maxima, or this saddle point, will all satisfy that this f prime, gradient of an x is equal to 0. So for example, if we consider three-dimensional vector and their gradient, and then dx1 over df and dx2, this gradient vector will be equal to 0, right? But we can also think of their second order derivative. So for example, like this guy. So if this guy is greater than 0, and then along the x dimension, is it like this or this? So it is like this, because in this case, the second order derivative is increasing, right? So that means this guy is a local minima, right? And then if it is less than 0, and then it means at this point it is a local maxima, right? So in general, when we found this point, okay, and then it is called the local minima, okay, local minima when this guy, the second order derivative is all positive, right? And then, but in practice, the second order derivative will have sometimes positive values or sometimes negative values. So in general, they will have a different signs in general, right? So that is called a saddle point, where along the one particular axis it is increasing, and along the other direction it is decreasing. So that is called the saddle point. And then, do you guys know why it is called the saddle point? So this is one simple example of a saddle point where along the x and y axis the gradient value or the first order derivative is all 0, but along the first axis it is increasing, and along the another axis it is kind of like decreasing in terms of the second order derivative, which means local minima along the one axis and the local maxima along the other axis. So it just looks like a saddle where we put it in the back of the horse, right? So that's why it is called the saddle point. Okay, so once we reach this saddle point, and then it is really difficult to escape from that saddle point along, when using the gradient descent, because approximately we are satisfying this kind of relationship, which means that the gradient is all 0 across each dimension, and thus we have no force or no kind of initiatives to move or escape our point from the saddle point, right? So that way we have to kind of, it will be better to use the momentum idea, right? Okay, so also in the 1D case, given when reaching this point, even though the gradient have become all 0, and then since we accumulated the gradient coming from the previous iterations, we can still have the force that can move this point, right? And then also related to the quiz problem, why is momentum overshoots? Why does the gradient momentum method overshoots? Okay, so given this, so it has the advantage of escaping from some small local minima, right? So given this point, if we moved from here, we accumulate the gradient that are all positive directions, and then even at this point where we have a really small gradient to the left direction, because of this accumulated gradient, we can actually move it to the right, okay? Because the previous gradients are accumulated as all positive ones, pointing to the right direction. Okay, and then suppose we follow those points by following the gradient momentum method, and then suppose we reach it at this point, and then in this case we will have the gradient pointing to the left direction, and so in this case we will move it to the left where we have this global minima, right? But in the case of momentum method, even if we have a left direction as our gradient, it will still send this to the right direction because of this accumulated gradient. But still, the gradient following these points will now be negative, or this left directions, and thus those gradient will be also accumulated, and at some point it will have the accumulated gradient as the negative or left direction. Okay, so that's why this gradient, momentum, is usually overshoots like this. Okay. I think you saw So there are many interesting examples that you can find on the web to see the difference between different algorithms. So it is like showing the behavior of different methods when stuck at the saddle point. Okay, then yeah, I forgot the link that shows different methods. Yeah, but yeah, I'll show it in the next time. But I believe in the current CS231N lectures, yeah, you guys have seen that the behavior of this momentum is actually overshooting compared to the other methods. So for example, yeah, so if we started from here and then it is like this, right? So this is the meaning of overshooting, right? So we want this to follow this optimal route, but due to the gradient accumulating, yeah, it shows this kind of behavior. But still, yeah, it has the advantage of this, escaping some small local minima, and also, yeah, and also, what is the advantage of this poor conditioning problem when using the momentum? So in this case, actually in the case of an horizontal axis, given the same step size, it is moving like this much at every iteration, right? So it will take a lot of steps, but at the same time, on the y-axis, the gradient is usually really high, and so it actually has the effect of large learning rate, right? Because the gradient, magnitude of the gradient is really large along the y-axis, right? And so in this case, if we use the momentum method, and then in case of this overshooting or too large kind of a movement, and then even if the gradient is large at each iteration, at this point, the gradient will also be large, but the direction will be negative, right? So if we accumulate these positive and the negative gradients, and then, yeah, they will cancel out. And thus, after many iterations, those gradients will become really small values, because this positive and the negative large gradients will cancel out each other. But in the case of this small learning rate, where the same direction is appearing over iterations, and then, yeah, even though the gradient magnitude is small, and then once they are accumulated, and then their gradient will become large, right? And so the velocity along the x-axis will be accelerated, but along the y-axis, the velocity will cancel out each other, and so it will remain as a small value. So that was the momentum method, and also in terms of this Nesterov momentum method. So I think some student asked a question about how this Nesterov momentum works. And so here, instead of using the the gradient values evaluated at the current step, if we use the momentum, we will anyways go to some other points by following the previous velocity, right? So we have already some amount of movement that is previously defined, which is regardless of our current gradient, right? And so how about just moving it to that direction anyways, and then what if we use the more recent or more fresh gradient after moving it to a new position by following the previous velocity. Okay, so that is the main idea of this Nesterov momentum. And so this is the term or the new position where we compute the gradient, right? And so in this case, we can just write it in this form, and then we plug this guy into here and here, right? So the first one is just the result of the first equation by just plugging this guy as x tilde, but in the case of the second one, we just changed it into this guy and minus this guy. Right, and so this guy is changed into and this guy is also changed into xt minus rho vt, right? And then here the main difference is this part, okay? So the relationship between xt and x tilde t is that they actually subtract the different amount of this velocity terms, okay? So this rho is coming from here by just applying the previous velocity to the current movement, current time steps movement, right? So this guy is used as the velocity to update to xt plus 1, right? So this guy is used to update xt plus 1, but in the case of an xt, so each of these values will have different amount of velocity subtracted from their original values, right? So xt plus 1 and xt, in terms of their relationship with x tilde t and x tilde t plus 1, they have this amount of a difference, right? And so once we move it to the right hand side, and then we will obtain this form. So up to this point, once you compare this guy and this guy, they are exactly the same, right? But now, instead of using original x, we are using x tilde, right? So between x tilde t and x tilde t plus 1, and then they have different amount of a velocity that we subtract, right? And so this amount should be compensated, or this amount should be added to make this guy equal to, the resulting equation become equal to the original equation. Okay? So x tilde t is again the new point by applying the currently accumulated velocity, right? And once we update it at this point, and then at this point, after one time step further, the velocity will have, the previously accumulated velocity at this point will become also different, right? And then those difference between the two kind of previously accumulated velocity will have this amount and thus we just add or incorporate this term, okay, to make those two values just the same as xt plus 1 and xt. Okay, so 네. 네, 이게 직관적으로 나도 사실 좀 아주 명확하게 좀 이해를 하고 좀 설명하는 건 아닌데, 자, 일단은 지금 위의 식은 어쨌건 지금 속도를 구해서 vt 플러스 1 혹은 지금 내가 적용해야 줘야 되는 속도를 구해서 이 속도만큼을 xt에다가 더해줘서 이렇게 그 다음 점으로 구하는, 이렇게 업데이트를 해주는 거잖아요. 네, 그리고 이 식은 이 식이 이제 네스트로프 모멘텀에서 보면 지금 여기서 포인트는 이 xt나 xt 플러스 1이랑 실제로 이 그레이디언트를 지금 구해주는 요 값이 실제로 같지 않다는 게 지금 포인트잖아요. 그래서 이거를 지금 같이 하려고 하는 거잖아요. 그러면 이 아래쪽은 뭐냐면 어쨌건 그레이디언트를 우리가 이밸류에이트를 구해야 되는 그 포인트들을 x 틸다로 놓고 그 x 틸다들을 이렇게 그 이터레이션에서 얘네들이 움직이는 그 궤적들에 해당하는 그 x1 틸다, x2 틸다 이렇게 해갖고 걔네들 하여튼 기준으로 아래 식을 다시 고친 거예요. 그렇죠? 근데 그러면 중요한 게 이 위쪽에 있는 식은 xt에서 xt 플러스 1으로 그 속도만큼을 업데이트를 해주는 거고, 이 아래쪽도 x 틸다 t에서 x 틸다 t 플러스 1으로 이렇게 업데이트를 해주는 건데, 실제로 xt와 x 틸다 t는 차이가 raw vt만큼 나고요. 그 다음엔 x 틸다 t와 x 틸다 t 플러스 1과 xt 플러스 1은 지금 raw의 vt 플러스 1만큼 차이가 나잖아요. 그래서 이 두 개 텀은 이제 raw라는 거는 그냥 상수니까 우리가 그냥 약간 무시하고요. 얘네들은 그냥 동일하게 같이 걸리는 상수니까 무시하고, vt랑 vt 플러스 1이 두 개가 방향도 다르고 뭐 크기도 다른, 엄밀히 말하면 두 개 서로 다른 벡터예요. 그렇죠? 그래서 xt와 xt 플러스 1이 있고 x 틸다 버전이 있는데, 얘네들이 어떻게 보면 정확하게 평행이동을 한 거라면, 즉 평행이동이라는 거는 같은 값의 벡터를 빼준 어떤 차이가 있는 거라면, 그러면 아래쪽 식은 이 텀이 없겠죠. 그죠? 왜냐하면 두 개가 그냥 평행이동 된 거라면. 근데 지금 x 틸다를 기준으로 하면 기존에 있었던 우리는 하여튼 이 식이랑 똑같은 지금 똑같은 업데이팅을 뭔가 해주고 싶은 건데, 근데 이제 저기서에 쓰이던 xt나 xt 플러스 1이랑은 이 아래쪽에서 쓰이는 x 틸다 t나 x 틸다 t 플러스 1이랑은 이제 차이가 얼마만큼 있느냐? 딱 요만큼 뭔가 있다라는. 그래서 이제 요만큼을 좀 뭔가 보정을 해주자. 네. 약간 이게 되고요. 네. 뭐 이 정도로 밖에 설명을 좀 못할 것 같고, 네. 네. 근데 뭔가 하여튼 좀 잘 생각해보면 이게 좀 흥미로운 직관적인 뭔가가 있긴 한데, 이걸 내가 네. 요즘 좀 머리가 안 좋아졌는데, 이게 좀 설명이 좀 뭐가 잘 안 되네요. 네. 뭔가 하여튼 이게 있어요. 네. 그러니까 한두 마디만 더, 이거 진짜 뭔가 있던데, 저거랑 이제 그러니까 아래쪽 식이 만약 이게 없으면 그냥 저거는 x 틸다를 그냥 xt로만 그냥 노테이션만 바꾸면 저거는 그냥 네스트로프가 아닌 그냥 그레이디언트 그거잖아요. 그죠? 네. 그러니까 저게 뭔가 지금 그러니까 그 전 타임 스텝에서는 그만큼 가서 거기서 이제 그거 그레이디언트를 구했어야 되는데, 이게 그 다음 스텝에서야 그레이디언트가 뭔가 나타나서 그것만큼 내가 그 속도 텀에 그 내가 잘못 합산한 그레이디언트의 그 보정값을 여기서 뭔가 좀 뭔가 보정을 해준다 이건데, 근데 이거 네, 결론적으로 얘기해서 그냥 이렇게 그냥 식으로만 고쳐지는 거는 이해는 되죠. 위의 식을 이 아래쪽이랑 그냥 네, 동등하다라는 거는 이해가 될 거고요. 네, 거기까지만 알면 될 것 같아요. 네, 그리고 저 영어로 참 뭔가 설명하는 게 이렇게 이 과목은 왜 이렇게 어려운지 모르겠네요. 뭔가 이게 이 단어들을 뭔가 단어들이 너무 오픈엔디드라서 내 보캐블러리를 좀 딸리는 것 같은데 어찌됐건 결론적으로 이쪽 메서드를 잘 공부하는 거는 중요한데 결국은 아담이라고 하는 방법이 가장 그래도 많이 쓰이는 방법이고 그게 어떻게 보면 약간은 RMS 프락과 저쪽 그 모멘텀 두 개의 방법을 합친 방법이잖아요. 그걸 자세하게 설명은 하진 않았지만 하여튼 강의를 봤으면 어느 정도는 이해를 하고 있을 텐데 그게 좀 핵심이고 결론적으로는 아담을 가장 많이 써요. 요즘은. 그런 정도로 알고 있으면 될 것 같고 다음 수요일에 또 보기로 하죠.